The observation deck of the Nexus Prime stretched across 3 levels, its transparent aluminum walls offering an unobstructed view of the swirling nebula beyond. Captain Tazkor stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his 4 eyes tracking the subtle movements of distant stars. His chitinous exoskeleton gleamed under the ship's bioluminescent lighting, a natural armor that had protected his species through countless generations of interstellar conflict. "Captain," came the melodic voice of Communications Officer Lyriana, her crystalline form refracting the ambient light into prismatic patterns. "The human delegation has arrived at Docking Bay 7. Tazkor's antennae twitched a sign of contemplation in his species. "Humans." He repeated the word carrying weight he hadn't expected. 3 decades had passed since the Sol system officially joined the Galactic Union, yet direct contact between the core species remained remarkably limited. "Summon Commander Zarek and Dr. Vorthak. I want the entire senior staff present for this meeting." The bridge hummed with activity as the senior officers assembled. Zarek, whose metallic exoskeleton bore the scars of the Andromedan Wars, carried himself with the rigid posture of a career military officer. Dr. Vorthak, the ship's chief xenobiologist, approached with tentacles swaying in what his aquatic species considered a gesture of greeting. "Status report on the human delegation," Tazkor commanded. Lyriana's form shimmered as she accessed the ship's databases. "Ambassador Emily Richardson, age 37, standard cycles, representing Earth's diplomatic corps. She's accompanied by 2 attachés and a security detail. Initial scans indicate standard human physiology, no augmentations detected." Commander Zarek's mechanical voice carried disapproval. "Captain, I must voice my concerns again. The intelligence reports on humans are inconsistent. Their emotional unpredictability has caused diplomatic incidents across 7 sectors." Dr. Vorthak's primary tentacle gestured dismissively. "Emotional expression is simply a form of chemical communication, Commander. Their tears, laughter, anger, all biological responses that can be quantified and understood." "That's precisely what concerns me," Zarek replied. "Our enemies might exploit these weaknesses." Tazkor raised a clawed hand for silence. "Speculation serves no purpose. We will observe, learn, and judge based on facts, not rumors. Now prepare Conference Room Alpha for the delegation." An hour later, the senior staff assembled in the conference room, a circular chamber designed to accommodate the diverse physiologies of Union species. The lighting had been adjusted to human preferences, and the gravity maintained at Earth standard to ensure their guests' comfort. The doors whispered open, and Ambassador Emily Richardson entered with measured steps. She wore the formal blue uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps, her auburn hair neatly arranged despite the long journey. Her brown eyes swept the room, taking in each alien form with professional composure. "Captain Tazkor," she said, offering a slight bow, a gesture that her briefings had indicated was appropriate for his species. "I am Ambassador Richardson. Thank you for hosting this historic meeting." "The honor is ours," Ambassador Tazkor replied, his translator rendering his clicks and whistles into flawless standard. "Please be seated. May I introduce my senior staff?" The introductions proceeded smoothly, each officer offering greetings in their species' traditional manner. Emily responded appropriately, to each demonstrating the extensive cultural preparation that had preceded this mission. "Ambassador," Dr. Vorthak began, his voice bubbling through his breathing apparatus. "I confess a scientific curiosity about your species' emotional expressions. Our preliminary studies suggest a complexity that rivals even our most sophisticated communication systems." Emily smiled, another human expression that had been cataloged, but whose exact meaning often eluded translation. "Emotion is indeed integral to human communication, Doctor. We've found that purely logical discourse, while efficient, often lacks the nuance necessary for deep understanding." Commander Zarek leaned forward, his optical sensors focusing on her with mechanical precision. Efficiency is the cornerstone of Union Protocol Ambassador. How do you reconcile emotional volatility with the demands of interstellar governance? I wouldn't characterize human emotion as volatility, Commander, no, Emily replied diplomatically. Rather, it's a sophisticated system that allows us to process complex social and ethical scenarios. Empathy, for instance, helps us understand perspectives beyond our own immediate experience. For 20 minutes, the discussion continued cordially. Emily fielded questions about human culture technology and their contributions to the Union. She spoke eloquently about Earth's commitment to peaceful cooperation and their desire to learn from other species. Then her wrist communicator chimed softly. Emily glanced at the device, and her professional composure flickered. Her eyes widened slightly as she read the message, and something shifted in her expression. A transformation so subtle that most of the alien observers barely registered it. But then, without warning, tears began to flow down Emily's cheeks. The effect on the room was immediate and profound. Captain Tazkor's antennae snapped to attention, his body tensing as if preparing for combat. Commander Zarek's hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm, while Dr. Vorthak's tentacles writhed in agitation. Ambassador. Tazkor's voice carried an edge of concern and suspicion. What is happening to you? Emily seemed unaware of the tears streaming down her face as she stared at her communicator. Her shoulders began to shake a movement that the alien observers could only interpret as some form of physical distress or system malfunction. Liriana, whose crystalline form pulsed rapidly with alarm, activated internal scanners. Captain, I'm detecting elevated biochemical activity. Increased heart rate, altered respiratory patterns, elevated production of sodium chloride through the optical ducts. Sodium chloride. Dr. Vorthak repeated, his excitement overriding his concern. She's literally leaking salt water from her eyes. Is this some form of biological emergency? Should we summon medical personnel? Commander Zarek stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Captain, this could be a deception tactic. I've read reports of human psychological warfare techniques. Stand down, Commander Tazkor ordered, though his own uncertainty was evident. He had witnessed many first contact scenarios, but nothing in his training had prepared him for this particular situation. Emily finally looked up, seemingly registering the alarm her tears had caused. She wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand, another inexplicable human gesture. I apologize, she said, her voice carrying a tremor that made several officers step back. This is highly unprofessional of me, Ambassador Tazkor said carefully, as if addressing a potentially volatile explosive device. Are you experiencing a medical emergency? Do you require assistance? Emily shook her head, more tears falling as she did so. No medical emergency, She held up her communicator. I just received news from Earth. The room fell silent except for the gentle hum of life support systems. The alien officers exchanged glances, their various forms of nonverbal communication creating a symphony of confusion and concern. What kind of news, Soul? Dr. Vorthak asked, his tentacles swaying in a pattern that indicated therapeutic intent. Is your planet under attack? Has there been a catastrophe? Emily laughed, a sound that made several officers reach for weapons, while tears continued to stream down her face. No, nothing like that. She paused, seeming to gather herself. My daughter just took her first steps. The silence that followed was so profound that it seemed to have physical weight. Captain Tazkor's antennae drooped in confusion, while Commander Zarek's optical sensors focused and refocused, as if trying to find the hidden meaning in her words. Your offspring achieved bipedal locomotion, Dr. Vorthak said slowly. And this caused the saltwater excretion. She's 15 months old. Emily continued, apparently oblivious to the consternation she was causing. I've been away from Earth for 3 months for these negotiations. I missed it. I missed watching her take her first steps, and my partner sent me a video and the tears flowed harder. You're leaking because your offspring demonstrated basic motor function. Commander Zarek asked, his voice containing a level of bewilderment that his mechanical nature rarely allowed. While you were absent from your territory, Emily looked around the room, finally seeming to understand the magnitude of confusion she had created. Tears, she said softly. They're called tears. And yes, I'm crying because I'm happy. If the room had been silent before, it now existed in a vacuum of comprehension. Captain Tazkor found himself in the unprecedented position of being completely unable to process what he had witnessed. Happy, he repeated. You are expressing joy through saltwater leakage. It's hard to explain to someone who hasn't experienced it, Emily said, wiping her eyes again. Humans cry for many reasons. Sometimes from sadness, sometimes from sometimes from joy. In this case, it's joy mixed with a bit of sadness that I missed such an important moment. Dr. Vorthak's tentacles writhed in what his species considered deep contemplation. Fascinating. Your species has developed a unified physical response to diverse emotional states. The biochemical complexity must be extraordinary. But why water specifically? Liriana asked, her crystalline form pulsing with curiosity. What evolutionary advantage does leaking vital fluids provide? Emily considered this. Scientists believe it's a social bonding mechanism. Tears trigger empathy in other humans, encouraging group cooperation and support. It's also thought to release stress hormones and toxins. Commander Zarek remained standing, his posture rigid with suspicion. Ambassador, I must point out that your emotional display has created significant alarm among my crew. In many species, such excessive fluid loss indicates imminent death. I understand your concern, Emily replied, her tears beginning to subside. I should have warned you that humans sometimes cry during important meetings. It's not intentional, and it's not a sign of weakness or deception. Not a sign of weakness, Zarek challenged. You admit to compromising your professional composure due to an offspring's mundane developmental milestone. How can the Union trust a species so volatile? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Emily straightened in her chair, and something changed in her demeanor. The tears continued to track down her cheeks, but her voice grew steady and strong. Commander, you mistake emotional expression for weakness, she said, meeting his optical sensors directly. In the 3 months I've been negotiating the mining rights treaty for the Kepler 442 system, I haven't once compromised Earth's interests. I've maintained professional relationships with 17 different species, navigated complex cultural obstacles, and secured agreements that will benefit the entire Union. She stood matching Zarek's posture with her own form of military bearing. Those tears you see, they represent my connection to what I'm fighting for. Every concession I make, every negotiation I navigate, every diplomatic challenge I face, I do it knowing that my choices affect my daughter's future. Captain Tazkor found himself leaning forward, drawn in by the intensity of her words, despite his ongoing confusion. You call us volatile, Emily continued, but perhaps that volatility is precisely what the Union needs. When I cry over my daughter's first steps, I'm reminded of why peace matters. When I feel anger at injustice, I'm motivated to fight for change. When I experience fear for my loved ones, I work harder to ensure their safety. She turned to address the entire room. Your species have achieved remarkable things through logic and efficiency. But emotion, what you call volatility, it's what drives innovation, sacrifice, and the willingness to reach beyond what already exists. Dr. Vorthak's tentacles had stilled, hanging motionless as he processed her words. You're suggesting that emotional instability is an asset. I'm suggesting that the capacity to feel deeply makes us care deeply, Emily replied. And beings who care deeply are willing to do extraordinary things. Commander Zarek slowly retook his seat, his mechanical features betraying what might have been the beginning of understanding. These tears, they are not random then. They serve a purpose. Everything in nature serves a purpose, Commander, Emily said finally, wiping away the last of her tears. Even the things that seemed to make no logical sense. Suddenly, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Red lights bathed the conference room as emergency protocols activated. Through the transparent walls, they could see crew members moving with urgent purpose through the corridors. Captain Tazkor's communicator crackled to life. "Captain, to the bridge immediately. We have multiple ships decloaking off the port bow. Unknown configuration, unknown allegiance." The captain rose swiftly, his 4 eyes dark with concern. "Maintain your positions." He ordered his staff, then hurried toward the bridge. Within minutes, he returned his antennae flat against his head, a sign of extreme agitation in his species. "Ambassador," he said grimly, "I'm afraid our first contact protocols will have to be temporarily suspended. We're facing a situation that requires immediate attention." Before Emily could respond, the conference room's main display activated, showing the view from the ship's forward cameras. 7 sleek vessels hung in space before them, their design unlike anything in the Union's databases. They were dark angular things that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Gentlemen," came a voice through the ship's communication system. A voice speaking perfect standard, but with an accent and rhythm entirely unknown to any of them. "I am Fleet Commander Vex High of the Void Collective. We have come to deliver a message to the so-called Galactic Union." Dr. Vorthak's primary tentacle coiled tightly around his thinking apparatus. "Captain, the Void Collective has been mythical for millennia. They're supposed to be a confederation of species that rejected Union membership thousands of years ago. Today, myth becomes reality." Vex High's voice continued. "For too long, we have watched the Union spread its influence across the galaxy, forcing its peaceful coexistence upon species that had no choice in the matter. Today, that ends." Emily had been watching the display with professional attention, but something about the ships, about the voice, made her face grow pale. "We have come to inform you that the age of the Union is ending," Vex High announced. "Those species that wish to join our collective may do so freely. Those that resist will be persuaded." Commander Zarek's weapon systems were already powering up. "Captain, we should alert Union Command immediately." "Communications are being jammed," Liriana reported, her crystalline form pulsing with frustrated energy. "I cannot reach beyond this system." Emily stood slowly, her eyes fixed on the screen. "Captain, what is your ship's defensive capability?" "We're a diplomatic vessel, Ambassador, not a warship. Our shields are primarily designed to protect against debris and radiation, not military assault." "Then we need to negotiate," Emily said firmly. "With respect, Ambassador," Commander Zarek interjected, "the time for negotiation appears to have passed." Emily turned to him, and there was something in her expression that made the seasoned military officer step back. "Commander, negotiation is never over until someone starts shooting. Captain, open a channel." Tazkor hesitated, then nodded to Liriana. "Channel open, Ambassador." Emily stepped forward, her voice carrying across space with absolute clarity. "Fleet Commander Vex High, I am Ambassador Emily Richardson of Earth. The ship you're threatening carries diplomatic personnel from multiple Union worlds. Your actions constitute an act of war against sovereign territories." Laughter came through the speakers, a sound that seemed to carry undertones of multiple species, as if the collective's leader possessed more than one vocal system. "A human," Vex High said, and there was something like delight in his voice. "How fortunate. We had hoped to encounter your species during this demonstration." "Demonstration?" Emily asked, her voice steady despite the growing tension. "Indeed. You see, we have been watching humanity since you joined the Union. Your species presents a particular fascination to us. Tell me, human, do you know why your people were admitted to the Union so readily, despite lacking the technological sophistication of other species?" Emily remained silent, though Captain Tazkor noticed her hands had clenched into fists. "It was your emotions," Vex High continued. The Union leadership believed that beings capable of such strong emotional responses would make ideal diplomats, mediators, bridges between rational species. They thought your feelings would make you weak, malleable, controllable. The channel crackled with what might have been amusement. They were wrong about the weak part. Suddenly, the lead void ship launched something toward the Nexus Prime. Not a weapon, but some kind of probe. It attached itself to the hull with a sound that reverberated through the ship's superstructure. What we're transmitting now, Vex-High said, is data. Historical records, suppressed files, classified information about what your precious Union has done to species that refused to join willingly. The genocides, the forced relocations, the cultural extinctions. Emily felt the color drain from her face as data streams began appearing on the wall displays. Images, documents, testimony, a catalog of atrocities spanning thousands of years. Your Union isn't the peaceful confederation it pretends to be, Vex-High continued. It's a conquering force that uses diplomacy as a first option only because it's cheaper than war, but it always has war as a backup plan. Dr. Vorthak's tentacles writhed in agitation as he scanned the incoming data. Captain, these files, if authentic, they detail systematic suppression of at least 47 species over the past 3 millennia. The beautiful irony, Vex-High said, is that humans the species? The Union thought would be perfect diplomatic tools are the ones who will end them. You see, we've been watching human behavior throughout the galaxy. When humans learn the truth, when they feel betrayed, they don't just get angry. They get absolutely devastatingly furious. Emily was staring at the data, her face cycling through. Expressions of disbelief, horror, and mounting rage. Tears had begun flowing again, but these were different from before. Harder, angrier tears. The Union counted on human emotions, making you compliant. Vex-High continued. But they forgot that the same emotions that drive you to cry over a child's first steps will drive you to fight when innocent children are threatened. This can't be true, Emily whispered, but her voice carried no conviction. Oh, but it is, Vex-High assured her. And now you understand why we chose this ship this moment to reveal ourselves. Because we needed a human to see this. We needed a human to carry this truth back to Earth. Captain Tazkor stepped forward, his 4 eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and desperation. These allegations are... Not allegations, Captain, Vex-High interrupted. Facts. Your own government's classified facts. And now those facts will spread throughout human space like wildfire. Because that's what emotions do. They spread, they inspire, they ignite. Emily turned to face Captain Tazkor, and he took an involuntary step backward. Her tears had not stopped, but her expression had transformed into something that transcended anger. Is it true? She asked simply. Tazkor's antennae drooped. Ambassador, the Union's history is complex. There were difficult decisions made in the early centuries. Is it true? Emily repeated, her voice rising. The captain's silence was answer enough. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, her hands shaking as she processed what she had learned. When she opened them again, something fundamental had changed. Fleet Commander Vex-High. Oh, she said, her voice carrying a new edge. What do you want? We want the Union to end, he replied simply. We want the freedom to choose our own paths without coercion. We want justice for the species that were destroyed or absorbed against their will. And if the Union refuses, then we will give them the same choice they gave our ancestors: join us or be destroyed. Emily looked around the conference room, taking in the alien faces of beings she had come to respect over the past months. Dr. Vorthak, whose scientific curiosity and gentle nature had made their discussions about biology so fascinating. Lyriana, whose artistic expressions of light had moved Emily to tears during their cultural exchanges. Even Commander Zarek, whose rigid military bearing hid a deep concern for the safety of his crew. There has to be another way, she said finally. Perhaps there is, Vex-High agreed. Perhaps a species with the emotional intelligence to feel both compassion and righteous fury could find a path that beings like us hardened by millennia of conflict cannot see. The void ships began to move, forming a complex pattern around the Nexus Prime. "We are departing now," Vex High announced. "But first, a gift. The probe attached to your hull contains not just historical data, but also complete technical specifications for instantaneous communication across any distance, a technology the Union has possessed for centuries but chose not to share." Emily's eyes widened. Instantaneous communication? But that would revolutionize trade, diplomacy, family connections. Indeed. Imagine the families that could stay connected across the galaxy. Imagine the treaties that could be negotiated in real time. Imagine the lies that could no longer be maintained when truth travels faster than any attempt to suppress it. The implications hit Emily like a physical blow. All the separations, all the delayed communications, all the isolation that families like hers endured when serving in distant parts of the galaxy, it had all been unnecessary. "Why?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why keep such technology secret?" "Because informed citizens are harder to control than isolated ones," Vex High replied. "Because instant communication makes it impossible to tell different lies to different populations." The void ships began to fade from view, their cloaking systems re-engaging. "Ambassador Richardson?" Vex High's voice carried a note of something that might have been respect. "Your tears today were for joy at a child's first steps. Soon you'll need to decide what you'll cry for next, the lies you've discovered or the future you'll help create." The channel closed, leaving the conference room in stunned silence. Emily stood motionless for several moments, tears streaming down her face once again. But this time, the alien observers recognized something different in her posture, in her expression. This wasn't the helpless leaking they had witnessed earlier. This was something purposeful, something determined. "Captain," she said quietly, "I need to speak with Earth immediately." "Ambassador, I told you communications are still being jammed." Emily smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Not anymore. We have new technology to test." She moved to the probe data interface, her fingers dancing across the controls with surprising familiarity. The Void Collective wasn't lying about the communication technology. The principles are elegant. It uses quantum entanglement on a macroscopic scale. Dr. Vorthak tentatively approached. "You understand this technology, but it's completely foreign to Union science." "It's not foreign to human science," Emily replied, her voice carrying a bitter edge. "We developed similar theories decades ago, but the Union's technology transfer restrictions prevented us from pursuing them." She continued working, and within minutes had established a connection to Earth. The face that appeared on the screen was weathered in kind, belonging to Director Marcus Webb of Earth's Diplomatic Corps. "Emily? Thank God we've been trying to reach you for hours. The entire communication network went dark across 3 sectors." "Director," Emily said, and something in her tone made Webb lean forward with concern. "We have a problem, a big one." She transmitted the data package from the Void Collective, watching as Webb's expression changed from confusion to horror to anger. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "Emily, are you certain this is authentic?" "I've cross-referenced it with every database I have access to. The metadata checks out, the encryption signatures match Union protocols, and Captain Tazkor hasn't denied any of it." Behind her, Tazkor flinched as if struck. "Director," Emily continued, "I need you to call an emergency session of the United Nations Security Council. Every piece of this data needs to be verified and disseminated to every human colony simultaneously." Emily, the ramifications of this, if it gets out, it could destabilize the entire Union. Emily's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Director, the Union as we know it is already over. The question now is whether we help build something better, or watch it burn completely." Webb was quiet for a moment, then nodded grimly. "I'll make the calls. Emily, what's your situation there?" "We're safe for now, but I don't know for how long. The Void Collective claims they're giving the Union a choice: reform or be destroyed. but I think they've already decided which option they prefer. What do you need from Earth? Emily looked around the conference room at the alien officers who had become colleagues, even friends over the past months. I need you to remember that the biggest lie in that data isn't about the Union's crimes. It's about human nature. What do you mean? They classified us as emotionally compromised, politically weak, suitable only for minor diplomatic roles. But they were wrong. Our emotions don't make us weak. They make us dangerous. A species that can cry from joy one moment and fight for justice the next isn't a tool to be used. We're a force to be reckoned with. Webb nodded slowly. I'll relay your message to the appropriate authorities. Emily, be careful. If this data is accurate, there are going to be a lot of people in the Union hierarchy who won't want it verified. Director, Emily said, and her smile was sharp as a blade, let them try to stop us. They seem to have forgotten what humans do when someone threatens our children's future. The communication ended, leaving the conference room in tense silence. Emily turned to face Captain Tazkor and his staff. Captain, I'm going to give you a choice, she said softly. You can confine me to quarters and try to suppress what just happened, or you can help me contact every Union world simultaneously and let them decide for themselves what to do with this information. Tazkor's antennae twitched rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. Ambassador, you're asking me to potentially participate in the destruction of everything I've sworn to protect. No, Captain. I'm asking you to help save it. She stepped closer, her brown eyes meeting his 4 black ones. The Union can survive this, but only if it changes. Only if it becomes what it pretended to be all along. A voluntary confederation of equals, not a hegemony maintained through deception and force. Dr. Vorthak spoke up, his voice bubbling with uncertainty. But the chaos that will result from this information, entire species might revolt, systems might declare independence. Good, Emily said firmly. Let them choose for themselves. Let them make informed decisions about their own futures. Commander Zarek had been silent throughout the exchange, but now he stepped forward. Ambassador, the military implications of this action could be catastrophic. If the Union fragments, we'll be vulnerable to external threats to species like the Void Collective. Emily nodded. You're absolutely right, Commander. But you know what's more dangerous than facing external threats with a fragmented alliance? Facing them with an alliance built on lies and held together by coercion. Because when your subjects discover the truth, and they always do, eventually they don't just leave. They become your enemies. She turned to address the entire room. I've seen the data on human behavior that the Union collected before admitting us. They knew exactly what they were getting, a species that bonds strongly with others, that feels injustice like a physical pain, that will sacrifice everything to protect what we love. Her voice grew stronger, more passionate. They thought they could use those traits to make us compliant, but they misunderstood the fundamental nature of human emotion. We don't just feel love and loyalty for those close to us. When we form bonds, when we accept others into our pack, that loyalty extends to them too. She gestured toward the alien officers. Dr. Vorthek, you spent 3 hours yesterday explaining your species' artistic traditions to me. You showed me images of your children's molting ceremonies, proud as any human parent. Commander Zarek, when we discussed the ethics of defensive warfare, you spoke passionately about protecting innocence, not just your own species, but all species. The tears had stopped, but her eyes blazed with intensity. You became my pack, all of you. Not just humans, but the beings I've come to know and respect throughout the Union. And when someone threatens my pack, when someone lies to us and manipulates us and uses us, she paused, taking a deep breath. Well, they're about to learn exactly how dangerous human emotions can be. Captain Tazkor stood in silence for a long moment, his antennae drooping with the weight of decision. Finally, he looked up. Communications Officer Liriana, he said slowly, please prepare a general broadcast transmission to all Union worlds. Liriana's crystalline form pulsed with surprise. Captain, that will require utilizing the new technology from the Void probe. Command will see it as an act of... I know exactly what Command will see it as, Tazkor interrupted. Do it anyway. Emily felt a surge of hope, mixed with gratitude. Captain, you won't regret this. I hope you're right, Ambassador, because if you're wrong, we've just helped tear apart everything our civilizations have built together. If I'm wrong, Captain, then what we built wasn't worth preserving. The next several hours passed in a blur of activity. Using the Void Collective's instantaneous communication technology, they transmitted the historical data to every major world in the Union simultaneously. Emily crafted a message that accompanied the data, not a diplomatic statement carefully worded to avoid offense, but a human appeal to conscience that cut straight to the heart of the matter. As the responses began pouring in, it became clear that the galaxy was about to change in ways none of them could fully predict. Some species immediately demanded independence hearings. Others called for transparency committees and truth and reconciliation processes. A few threatened to join the Void Collective outright. But perhaps most significantly, messages began arriving from other human colonies, and they carried a fury that the alien officers found deeply disturbing. Ambassador Dr. Vorthak said, reviewing the latest communications, the human response is intense. Some of your people are calling for complete withdrawal from the Union, others for armed resistance against Union authority. Emily nodded grimly. That's exactly what I was afraid of. Humans don't do betrayal halfway. When we feel we've been lied to and manipulated, especially about something that affects our families. She shook her head. This is going to get ugly fast. Is there anything you can do to moderate the response? Emily considered this. I can try, but doctor, you have to understand humans have a concept called righteous fury. When we believe we're fighting for something greater than ourselves, when we feel our children's future has been threatened, we become... She searched for the right words. We become unstoppable. Not because we're physically superior, but because we simply won't quit, ever. Over the next days, as news of the revelations spread throughout human space, Emily's prediction proved accurate. Human colonies across the galaxy began organizing, not for war, but for what they called aggressive negotiation. They demanded complete transparency from Union leadership, full disclosure of all classified historical documents, and fundamental reforms to Union governance. But it wasn't just humans responding. Species across the galaxy were reevaluating their relationship with the Union. The Void Collective's gambit had worked perfectly. They had turned the Union's greatest diplomatic asset into its greatest threat. Emily spent most of her time in communication with Earth and other human colonies, helping coordinate a response that was firm but not destructive. She found herself becoming a bridge between human fury and alien confusion, trying to channel their anger into productive change rather than devastating war. 1 week after the initial contact with the Void Collective, Captain Tazkor called Emily to his ready room for a private conversation. Ambassador, he said, settling into his specially designed chair, I wanted to thank you. Emily raised an eyebrow. For what, Captain? I've potentially helped destroy your government. No, Tazkor replied thoughtfully. You've helped save it. Do you know what I've been doing for the past week? I've been reading the historical files that we never had access to before. The real files, not the sanitized versions they give to military officers. He paused, his antennae drooping, with what Emily had learned was shame. My own species was one of the first to be integrated into the Union. We were told it was voluntary, that we eagerly embraced membership. But the true records? We fought. For decades. And when we finally surrendered, it wasn't because we were convinced, it was because they threatened to exterminate our children. Emily felt her eyes begin to fill with tears, an automatic response that she no longer tried to hide. I'm sorry, she said softly. I'm so sorry you had to learn it this way. Don't apologize, Tazkor said firmly. Be proud. Your species has done something mine never could. You had the strength to reveal the truth, even when it was painful, even when it threatened everything you thought you knew. He stood and moved to the window, gazing out at the stars. The Union will survive this, but it will be different. It will have to be. And that change will come because humans refuse to accept comfortable lies. Emily joined him at the window. Captain, can I ask you something? When you first saw me cry, were you really concerned about a medical emergency? Or were you afraid of what human emotion might mean for your carefully ordered universe? Tazkor's laugh was a series of clicks that his translator rendered as gentle amusement. Both, I think. Your tears were so foreign. My species evolved from desert creatures. We conserve every drop of moisture. The idea of deliberately leaking bodily fluids as a form of communication seemed not just wasteful, but dangerous. He turned to look at her directly. But I understand now. Your tears weren't a sign of weakness or malfunction. They were a sign of connection. You cry because you care, and beings who care that deeply will fight that much harder for what they believe in. The Void Collective understood that, Emily mused. They knew that if humans learned the truth, our emotional response would be swift and uncompromising. They used our own nature against the Union's assumptions about us. Indeed, but I think they may have underestimated something. What's that? Human tears don't just express sorrow and anger. They also express joy. And I believe humans will find a way to turn this catastrophe into something to be joyful about. Emily smiled, feeling tears build again this time, from hope rather than anger or sorrow. You may be right, Captain. You may be right. 3 months later, Emily stood in the same conference room where she had first cried in front of alien dignitaries. But this time, she wasn't alone. Representatives from dozens of species filled the space, all participating in what was being called the New Union Accords. The Void Collective had kept their word mostly. Several Union worlds had joined them. But rather than the violent conquest, many had feared they had formed their own confederation based on principles of true voluntary association. The remaining Union worlds were in the process of drafting a new charter that mandated transparency, limited the authority of central government, and established external oversight bodies. It wasn't perfect. There were still tensions, still disagreements about implementation and authority. But it was honest in a way the old Union had never been. Emily's daughter had taken many more steps by now, and thanks to the instantaneous communication technology that was now freely available throughout both confederations, Emily had seen every one of them in real time. The separation that had once been an unavoidable consequence of deep space service was now a choice rather than an obligation. Dr. Vorthak approached her as the day's session concluded. Ambassador, I've been analyzing the long-term psychological impacts of the changes we've implemented. Preliminary data suggests improved mental health across multiple species, reduced feelings of isolation, stronger family bonds. In other words, Dr. People are happier when they're not being lied to. Precisely, but I wanted to discuss something else with you, something personal. Emily tilted her head curiously. I've been studying human emotion extensively since our first meeting, Dr. Vorthak continued. And I believe I finally understood something that puzzled me initially. What's that? When you first cried in this room, you explained that humans cry for multiple reasons: joy, sadness, anger. But you never mentioned fear. Emily considered this. We do cry from fear, Doctor, but usually only when the fear is for others, not ourselves. Yes, exactly. And I realized something that I think the old Union leadership missed entirely. Which is, they thought your emotions made you weak because they make you vulnerable. But they failed to understand that beings who will cry for others, who will feel that deeply for people they've never met, are the most dangerous opponents imaginable when those people are threatened. Emily nodded slowly. We call it protective instinct, Doctor. Love made dangerous by necessity. The old Union leaders saw humans cry and thought they could control you through emotional manipulation. They didn't realize they were creating an army of beings who would feel personal responsibility for every injustice committed in their name. And once we learned about those injustices, You did exactly what any species would do when protecting their young. You fought back. Not with violence first, but with truth. And truth, as we've learned, can be more devastating than any weapon. Emily looked around the conference room, watching representatives from species that had been enemies for millennia working together to solve problems that had seemed insurmountable under the old system. "Doctor," she said finally, "I need to tell you something. That first day when I cried over my daughter's first steps, I wasn't just crying from joy and sadness. Oh, I was crying from fear. Fear that the universe I was helping to build for her was one where she would have to smile at people who lied to her, where she would have to accept injustice to maintain peace, where her emotions would be seen as weaknesses rather than strengths." She paused, feeling the familiar prick of tears behind her eyes. But looking at this room now, seeing species that once barely tolerated each other working together as equals, I think maybe I was crying because some part of me knew that everything was about to change, that my daughter would grow up in a universe where she could feel deeply, cry freely, and still be taken seriously as a leader and negotiator. Dr. Vorthak's tentacles swayed in what Emily had learned was deep emotion. "You know what the most remarkable thing about human tears is, Ambassador? What's that? They're contagious. Not biologically, but psychologically. When other species see humans cry, really cry, from the depths of your emotional core, it makes us examine our own capacity for feeling. It makes us wonder what we might be missing by maintaining emotional distance." He gestured at the bustling room around them. "Look at the representatives here today. Notice how many of them are expressing emotions more freely than they would have under the old protocols. Your tears didn't just change the political landscape, Ambassador. They changed the emotional landscape too." Emily felt a tear track down her cheek, a single drop that somehow managed to contain joy, pride, hope, and a dozen other emotions she couldn't name. "Doctor," she said, "I think that's the most beautiful scientific observation I've ever heard." As the day ended and the representatives began filing out, Emily remained in the conference room. Captain Tazkor found her there, staring out the great windows at the stars beyond. "Ambassador," he said, "I wanted to inform you personally. I've received word from the Void Collective. They're proposing a joint exploration mission to the galactic rim. Both our confederations working together." Emily turned surprised. "Really, I thought they wanted to maintain separation." "Apparently, they've reconsidered. It seems their leader Vex High was impressed by how humans handled the transition period. He specifically requested that humanity lead the diplomatic contingent." Emily laughed, wiping away another tear. "They want the emotional species to handle first contact with whatever's out there in the darkness." "It appears so. Are you interested?" Emily thought about her daughter taking her first steps in a universe that was now fundamentally different than it had been just months before. She thought about the tears she had shed, the fears she had faced, the truth she had helped reveal. "Captain," she said finally, "I think there's nothing I'd like more than to represent both confederations to whatever we find out there. But I have one condition." "Name it." "If I'm going to be out there for extended periods, I want that instantaneous communication link to Earth running continuously. I've missed enough of my daughter's milestones." Tazkor's antennae twitched in what Emily had learned was amusement. "Of course, Ambassador. After all, we've learned that human parents separated from their children can be even more dangerous than angry ones." Emily smiled, fresh tears. Welling up tears of joy, tears of anticipation. Tears for a future where emotion and logic could coexist, where truth mattered more than convenience, where a species' tears could change the course of galactic history. "Captain," she said, "I think we're going to accomplish extraordinary things." "I believe you're right, Ambassador. After all, we now have the most powerful diplomatic weapon in the galaxy." "What's that?" "Human emotion unleashed and unashamed." Emily nodded, looking out at the stars that held so much promise, so much potential for connection and understanding. Somewhere out there, her daughter was taking steps into a universe where tears were no longer seen as weakness, where feeling deeply was valued rather than feared, where the end of one era had become the beginning of something infinitely better. She cried then, one last time in that conference room, where everything had changed. But these tears were different from all the others. These tears were for the future, bright and uncertain and full of infinite possibility. And in the end, that's what human tears had always been about. The courage to feel deeply in an often harsh universe, the strength to believe in something better, and the determination to make that belief. Reality one tear, one truth, one step at a time. The galaxy would never be the same. And that Emily thought as she wiped her eyes and headed for her quarters to call her daughter was exactly as it should be.